Hey there! Welcome back to the Learn Talk training program.
So far, we've been looking at the higher level philosophy and principles of how we teach here. If you're still scratching your head about how these principles look when teaching a class, well, today is your day.
That's right! Our session today is all about our methodology. We'll break down for you parts of a Learn Talk lesson and show you what you're supposed to do during each of them.
Mondo, it might get a little bit tricky if we call them parts.
Yeah.
As parts don't necessarily have to be done in order. Let's call them phases instead.
Phases? Okay.
Yes, because they should be taught in order.
Alright, I like that. Phases. Got it. Sounds like we're working on a project together.
Yes, we
Right?
are. Well, we pretty much are. Our project is to help our students learn functional and practical English.
That's right.
In order to do that, our methodology is designed to get our students to 1. Understand the context and meaning of the target language. 2. Practice the target language in different conversational situations. 3. Use the target language in simulations of real life.
Now remember back a couple of sessions ago, we talked about how language acquisition is best achieved when learners have the opportunity to experiment with the language naturally in real-life situations.
Remember also that one of our goals is to help our students use the language to actually communicate. Well, what better way to learn language than by using it to perform tasks our students can actually use in real life?
Bear in mind that these tasks have to be as real as possible so our students will be more motivated to learn and achieve these goals. It's our job as teachers to create a safe learning environment for them to understand, experiment, and practice the language with each lesson.
Now we've got a question for you. Who here has ever acted in a play or in a drama class before? Any aspiring Tony winners in the making out there?
For those of you who have been in a play before, I'm sure you recognize the names of the phases in our lesson plans. We named them after these terms related to plays because that's how we'd like you to think about the lesson. A play where you are the director and your student is the actor.
Actually, you're gonna do some acting at the end of the lesson yourself. Don't worry, some of the best directors started off as actors first.
Yes. Let's take a look now at how to go about teaching through each phase. We covered what to do during the warm-up phase during our previous session together. So we'll begin the second phase, direct.
This begins immediately after you've set the context and goals for the lesson. It's where you introduce the target language and demonstrate how to use it by asking a series of questions that help your students infer the meaning of the language on their own and then repeat.
Like any good director, you want to demonstrate how the vocabulary or grammar phrases are used first, then ask the student to repeat. Another element of a good director is to see if the actors have internalized their roles.
During the lesson, this means you're constantly checking if the student comprehends the word by asking follow-up questions and reading their body language. Remember, you want your students to internalize the language by reaching their own conclusions. Try to avoid explaining things directly as much as possible, and never explain the meaning of the word or the logic of a grammar structure without giving demonstrations beforehand.
Most of the time, after introducing a new word or phrase, your student will make a mistake or an error in, say, pronunciation or grammar. That's a good thing, because this is the phase of the lesson where you want to correct as much as possible.
Yes, the overall focus of this phase is on accuracy, or getting your student to pronounce and understand the target language correctly. You want to correct as many of the student's errors as possible and do so quickly and comfortably. Also, provide positive feedback when they get it right.
If your student makes a mistake with pronunciation, interrupt and demonstrate how to pronounce the word correctly and ask them to repeat.
Also, if your student doesn't understand a certain word or phrase, ask follow-up questions using new examples. But be careful not to ask them the exact same question twice. Instead, you can ask another question or use the whiteboard to draw an example of the noun that's being taught.
Once you're confident your student is saying each of the new words or phrases correctly, you can move on to the next phase, rehearse.
This is the phase where you put into practice the new language your students just learned, much like the rehearsals before a play.
Unlike the direct phase, where you're focusing on demonstrating the target language and correcting your students' mistakes, the rehearse phase is where you'll allow your student to experiment with the language.
Your goal is to facilitate a less controlled discussion by asking more open-ended questions that force the student to use the language. Because we want our students to experiment as much as possible, you need to refrain from correcting every single mistake your student makes during this phase.
That's right, Bianca. Focus instead on correcting major errors that your student repeats. But if your student slips on some pronunciation or slips a little with some grammar, keep the discussion flowing.
Be mindful of the time and control the discussion if it begins to veer off topic by going back to the previous target words or phrases. These practice sessions can eat up a lot of time, so be sure to bring it back to the lesson if needed.
That's right. Once you've gone through the questions and given your student the opportunity to use the new language in a less controlled conversation, you can proceed to the second direct phase and introduce the next set of targeted words or phrases.
The second direct phase often uses the dialogue of the lesson to show how the new language is used. Ask your students the related questions after the two of you read it out loud.
After this phase, you're ready for showtime. The last element of each lesson, the role plays. Remember, your student should have a clear and confident understanding of target language before proceeding with the role plays.
Set up your role plays by asking your students to choose which situation they'd like to act out. Have your student read the situation out loud and explain that you'll be acting as the second character in it.
Also, make sure you give a clear time limit and encourage your student to try and get into character as much as possible. They'll take their cue from you, so make sure you put on your best acting skills as well.
Overall, the showtime phase is used to evaluate if the student has learned the target language. Do not correct any errors they make during the role play. Instead, jot down and take notes of all the mistakes made or areas you want them to improve on. And after they're finished, go over these points as feedback.
Remember to keep your feedback as positive as possible. We'll get into the details of how to deliver an effective role play later.
That's it for now. Hope you have a much clearer feel of how each lesson should be taught and how the order of things are. Keep those performances coming.